My name is Bryan Clothier. I attended the one-room schoolhouse from approximately 1947 to, let me see, 4 years. We had 4 grades, so it would be 4 years beyond 1947, and then we went to the main school in Corinth, the Central School.
What was the name of that schoolhouse, and do you remember the district number?
District 4, and it was, I think it was known as the Rock School because there was a stone quarry right there at that corner. There were huge boulders, and that was one of the recess fun times, was climb on the boulders back when there wasn't so much supervision on everything. I was just 5 years old, and I remember my mother taking me to meet the teacher, and we were standing there, and my mother was holding my hand, and the kid that turned out to be the one-room school bully walked up to me with a metal coat hanger and dug it into my cheek and gave it a quick yank, and I've still got the scar right here.
In front of the adults?
Well, my mother and the teacher were talking, and my mother said, "If you don't quit whimpering, I'm going to take you home and really give you something to whimper about." And here I was, I just looked at blood on my fingertips, and so I quit crying, and anyway, so that's the date. That would be in 1947, and that was my first encounter with academia.
How did you get to school each day?
I walked because my house was, well, the school got their water from our house. We carried it up there in a pail, and it had a little ceramic water dispenser, and it had a little button on it, and you take your paper cup and put it under the thing, push the button, and you'd have your cup of water. And so my walk to school was, in fact, with a hand sled, I could hit the top of the hill on an icy day and go the length of the hill and turn right into my driveway. So I wasn't that far from school. So that's how far I had to walk.
So pretty close. Do you remember how far others might have had to walk?
I would think my grandfather always used to tell me that Fuller Road, which the school is on, is about 1 mile in length, and there was a O'Leary young girl on the end of that road. Her name was O'Leary, and she used to walk to school every morning. And then there was the Foltz family up on Foltz Road, and there was a girl named Ruth Robinson, and I'm sure it was over a mile to her house on Foltz Road. It wasn't as bad as a lot of districts where people had walked 5 miles and so on. I would say the maximum distance was about a mile to the school, and they walked every morning.
Rain or shine, snow or sleet?
Rain or shine, snow, sleet, you name it. The building was post and beam construction, and went back to 1811. The walls had blackboards on each side, and the teacher would put messages and lessons on the blackboard in chalk. And there was a world map that sat behind the teacher's desk. And if she ever wanted to point out where Egypt was and all the pyramids, she would take her pointer and she'd go up to the map behind her desk and she'd point out these various things. And then I vaguely remember a piano. And when Christmas came, we had our Christmas party, and we all had a part in the Christmas. So, there was a piano, and to stay on the subject. And then the other thing was the heating system was a big coal stove. And I had a guy who turned out to be a nuclear engineer that attended the school. And I think he lived where the O'Leary people did at the end of Fuller Road. And he drew this picture of the stove the way he remembered it in such detail. And it must have made a big impression on him, but he was pretty high up in the as an engineer. So, and he graduated from the schoolhouse. Yeah.
Ever any accidents with that stove?
None that I remember. I think there was a distinctive smell.
Can you describe that?
Well, like anybody that burns coal, I think you have this unnatural smell. I don't know what you'd call it. Sort of a chemical smell. Probably didn't do any of us much good. But anyway, that and so the coal stove in the back and the map behind the teacher's desk, and then you had the seats were lined up, so each row was the length of the schoolhouse, and then you had your teacher at the head of the thing, and then there was a door right next to the teacher's desk that went out into the woodshed, and the boys and girls room were back there and in the woodshed, and you got permission to go out and use that. And a lot of the time, I think the coal stove was came about after World War II. But before that, my brother was a custodian at the schoolhouse, and there was a wood stove, big wood stove in the back. And he used to go, his job was to go over and start the wood fire in the winter. And then he would take the water over, pail of water, fill the little ceramic container there. And then he'd sweep up and come back home, and then he'd go to school. He was a teenager. And I remember him coming in one morning all excited, and I don't think they locked the doors on the school, but he was all excited. He had all these burnt pieces of dollar bills, and back then a dollar bill was a lot of money. And somebody had tried to start a fire in the wood stove with money. And he was so excited when he came home. He wondered if he could get the serial number off the dollar bills and turn them in. but that was his exciting time at the one-room school, being a custodian, as they called it.
And no idea where that money came from?
I assume, my grandfather used to go up to our barn and he'd see a place where somebody had slept all night, because they'd sneak in the barn and I imagine they were homeless, and Gramp would find imprints in the hay up there and say, well, another hobo came through. And I assume that's the same thing that happened at the one-room school, because somebody had some money and they wanted heat real bad. And but they obviously failed, because my brother said they never got it going. There was pieces of dollar bills there.
Returning to that piano for a second, were any of the children allowed to play it at all, or was it just for the teachers?
I think it was just for the teacher.
Just for the teacher. Yeah. And the play, Do you remember any of the parts that you might have had?
Well, my part was where you had what the name of the song, but my part was to clap my hands and at one part, and so we all had a little part in the song, and so we all got up and did our little part and clapped our hands at the right time, and all the parents were there, and everybody was sitting around and watching and laughing and having a good time. That it was originally a stone quarry, and the big boulders out there, everybody'd play hide and seek. And then there were various stages of baseball. We didn't have much space, but we could whack the ball and chase it out into the field or whatever. But then the main recess game was alley over, throw the ball over, and we'd have two teams of students in the school. One team would be on one side of the building and the other team would be on the front side. And we'd say, alley over, throw the ball over. And the team would throw the ball over. And if the other team caught the ball, they could run around the building and tag you. And if they tagged you, they'd take you back to the other side of the building. And their team grew. So more people you got to catch the ball because you never knew which end of the building it was going to come over. So you keep going until all of a sudden there's one guy left, and that was the end of the game. And but other games, gosh, I don't know, cowboys and Indians, the cap guns we could bring to school and bang, bang, bang away. And I remember I got in trouble once because I always wanted to be an Indian. And I made my own bow and arrow. And I went up there with my bow and arrow, and all the kids were running around, bang, bang, you're dead. And I made the mistake of shooting an arrow, and it was all homemade, very primitive. It was just basically a stick with twine, and I made my own arrows and anything. So I pulled up and I shot a guy at his legs, and it hit one of his legs and left a scratch. And you talk about being in trouble. I was in trouble with my parents. I was in trouble with the teacher. So I never brought another one of my homemade instruments to school. Bathrooms were basically a tube down in the ground, and I don't know what their reasoning was, but were like a long tile that went down. They're still up there. And what it did was it polluted the well, which was just a few yards away. And once that well was polluted, that led to them getting water from my parents. Like I said, my brother was custodian, and he hauled the water. So they condemned the well because of those poor planning, And so that the boys' room and the girls' room were out in the woodshed, we called it.
Can you tell us what a typical school day was like?
Well, when the bell rang, the teacher rang the bell. It was a handheld thing. And we'd all go in and sit down at the desks. And then the teacher would go from row to row, giving out lessons. A lot of things were handwritten. And the first grade, we would basically sit there and try to do our ABCs. And then the second grade was a little more complex. The teacher would get over there and she'd be talking to the class about 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and all kinds of little lessons on history. And so what happened was, and I think it was a wonderful situation, is that the children in the first grade were listening to the children in the second grade getting their lesson, and the third grade was listening to the fourth grade, and so on. So they were kind of prepared to go into the next class, next year of school. And it was to me, it was a great way to get an education, because, and then centralization, when you went up into the main school, it was a teacher at the head of the class, and it was one thing being taught. Where in a one-room school, you had a lot of things going on. Somebody in the second grade would come over and help you make your letters and show you how to make a 1 or 2, and the teacher, she'd be working with students, but other students she'd say to Billy, come on over here and show Bryan how to make a 5. And so Billy would come over and he'd, show me how to make a 5. So, so that was the way that worked.
Tell us a bit about some of the chores that the students might have done.
Well, the first one was taking a eraser and getting all the chalk off the chalkboards for the teacher. And I assume there was somebody had to have the initiative to get in fuel for the stove, but I don't remember ever doing that.
What about punishment chores?
Punishment. I guess you just sit in your chair and write, what I did wrong. I don't ever remember being hit or anything. I know there were bullies that tested their limits, but they usually got to stay after school. And I remember I was the first student to flunk the first grade. And my mother was a big part of that, because she said, there's no kindergarten, and my mother had no desire to give me a little head start on my ABCs. So you go in there, and all the other kids have had their parents work with them. And so I remember my big downfall was making an A. I made an A, lowercase a, and I went around twice and then put the ear on the A. And a girl saw me do that, and she told the teacher. And so teacher came over, watched me make an A. I went around twice and then put the ear on it. And my mother saying, I think you better hold them back. And so graduation day came, and the teacher brought in gifts for all the students that were going into the next grade. And I'll never forget it. I can even remember the gifts back in 1947 that were passed out to those kids. So it must have made an impression on me. But I remember Jimmy Woodard over here on Fuller Road. He got a flashlight. And I thought that was a most amazing gift to get, a flashlight. And the girls got the little books or whatever. And then she got to me, and she said, Bryan, she said, you're not going into the next grade, so I can't give you a gift. And so I sat there, and she looked, she just paused a moment, like maybe she'd made a mistake on not getting me something, And I said, Mrs. Davidson, my hound dog, Fly, just had a whole litter of pups. I got all the gifts I can handle. and she sort of passed it off. But that was kind of a traumatic time in the one-room school. I know there's one guy that went to the school with me, and he had one kid that was just after him all the time. And he was a very studious kid and a little bit overweight. And he'd try to walk home, and this guy would follow him. And then after everybody was out of sight, the kid would do all kinds of terrible things to this little boy. So, and then he'd tell the teacher the next morning, and the teacher would say, "Well, you're going to stay after school for doing that to poor Billy." And so, anyway, that's the worst punishment I know of that they did back then. You know, it was a kind of rough time because it was like kindergarten, first grade, all wrapped into one, and all the rest of the kids had. I would say most of the kids that attended the school on Fuller Road had a mother that was a teacher, and that really made me look bad. It didn't do much good to talk to the parents. The kids kind of got away with it, and I remember they all came from one area, and usually the father worked up here in the paper mill, and had a good job, but they kind of spoiled their kids a little more, and kind of, I don't know what you'd say, gave them a little more free rein, and didn't pay much attention to them because they were busy doing something else. And I think that contributed a lot to the bullies. You know, if a father had said, don't do that, and gave him a whack, he probably would have quit doing it. But there was lack of parental guidance right there. So that was my experience. Lunchtime was a great time for me because all the kids brought brown bags to school with their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and my grandmother would cook up a meal on the wood stove here, and I mean, it had apple pie, it had her trademark fried potatoes, it had gravy on the potatoes, it had, it was, and every day at noon, she'd walk in the door with this plate of food and hand it to me. I still feel a little bit guilty about that. It was kind of, as my grandmother's term was, cheeky. But anyway, it was great. I mean, she was a wonderful cook, and I look forward to noontime. It was a time when with one cereal box top, you could get an array of things by sending 50 cents in a box top to the Wheaties people. You could get, like an atomic ring, you could look at a little glass window and watch these things go back and forth. And I'm thinking that's not a very good thing. It was made out of lead, but I don't think having a ring where you could watch the little bright things go back and forth was a good idea. But anyway, so if we had a gift out of a Wheaties ad or something, we would, maybe trade for something some other kid had gotten out of a Wheaties box top or whatever. But that's about the extent of my trading.
Let's talk about your teacher next. Tell us about her.
Yeah, she came to school in her, I think it was a 47 Plymouth. And she was a nice lady. She had an interest in us being successful, so to speak. She was wanted order, as any teacher would, and I think she was a good teacher. Miss Davidson was her name. And then she went on, after she finished here at the one-room schoolhouse, of course, they were centralizing, so then she went up into town and taught similar grades up there. And we had like 3 schools at one time up here. We had the Palmer Avenue School, and then the Main Street School, and then the high school. And so she could find a place to teach in any one of those, you know. She lived up in Hadley, right near the railroad tracks, and she was commuted every day in her little Plymouth there. And I remember being invited up to her house one time, and I assume it was Mother trying to figure out how to make me more of a student. I don't know. So we went up there and had a visit with her. But I assume it was about me not being a good student. But that's Miss Davis was a nice lady. The paper mill was very generous with the schools up here because if a school wanted a ream of paper, they had these yellow sheets of paper, and the teacher always had paper on their desk, and you could just go up and take a sheet, you know. And there's a fellow who worked in the paper mill. He was a machine tender, and I can remember him coming there and painting the roof of the schoolhouse. And I don't know whether he volunteered or whether he got paid, but that was one parent. And then other parents, gee, maybe they were more involved than I can remember, but I just don't remember that many parents except at Christmas time. Well, Arbor Day, we planted trees, and the teacher came to me and said, can you and your grandfather go dig up a couple of small pine trees? And so I said, sure. So, you know, you're always wanting to please the teacher. So yes, I said, yes, Miss Davidson, I'll get those trees for you. So I told my grandfather, and he went out and back and pulled up a couple of small pines. And he says, is this good enough? And so I took him up to school, and all the class went out in the backyard. We had sort of a little celebration, and we planted the 2 trees on Arbor Day. And today, I can't reach around them, and it's kind of a plague because I began to wish I hadn't planted them when I went to a tree company and found out how much it would cost to take them down. So, but now they're kind of endangering the schoolhouse. You know, the limbs are out of control, but they're still there. I forget. I used to count the number of steps from here to the schoolhouse, which you can see from here, and it was, I guess, less than a 5-minute walk to the schoolhouse. I flunked the first grade, and I now own the schoolhouse. I can remember bringing my quarter to school for the savings bonds. Everybody had to have a little savings bond book, and you took in your quarter. And I do know up at the high school they had a lookout tower up there right behind the school to spot enemy aircraft, you know, and they manned it during the heights of the World War II. But down here, I guess we were just told, you know, if we see something strange, tell our parents. The biggest shock of going to the one-room school was going to the centralized school in town on a bus, because we were one big family at the one-room school. You knew everybody, and all of a sudden, you're shipped up to the middle of town, and then there's the rivalry thing. I remember when I got off the bus after leaving the one-room school, my foot hit the ground, and a guy punched me in the nose, and I hadn't said anything or done anything, and so it was quite an experience to go from down here. It was kind of a very friendly environment, save a couple of bullies, but going up to the main school was kind of traumatic. I was pretty much dyslexic. I think that was my problem all through school. And back then they had no way of figuring out why, you weren't excelling. And so at the time I was in high school, I got my pilot's license at 16, and I was flying in and out of the farm, and I was able to disassemble a diesel engine and put it back together and ran. So I had advantages, but as far as academia, I was horrible at mathematics and English. Because English required a lot of reading. And when they never could figure it out, but when I'd start to read, all the sentences would, after reading a paragraph, all the sentences would start moving around and getting crazy. And nobody recognized that. And it followed me all through school. I was lucky. Always lucky as far as going to school, because I walked right out and stood next to the road, and the bus picked me up. And then we were dropped off right at the entrance of the school. So I was very lucky. I remember the Woodard girl over here. She was always, seat behind me or something. And then there were Johnny Ling up on the hill. He attended a one-room school, and he was there.
What grade did you start when centralization had taken place? What grade were you in?
Fifth. Yeah, fifth grade. And like I say, there was a big difference because it was one subject, and you weren't able to glean anything with the people next door.
If you could step back into that schoolhouse for one day, what would you want to experience again?
My grandmother's meals. Her milk gravy on those potatoes. I mean, I don't know how she did it, but it was delicious. Maybe I was just hungry back then, but it was delicious. And the apple pie, that something about the crust she made for that apple pie was so flaky and delicious. There was one fellow, they were both from the same family. The Mosier family. Owen Mosier was my best friend. His mother was a school teacher, by the way, and he didn't mess up like I did. But he and I would build tree houses together, and he had an old garden tractor that he figured out how to put a cart behind. And my father had bought me a funny-looking little car with a gasoline engine in it. And Owen and I used to go up and down the runway out here with he would be driving his cart behind the garden tractor, and we had more fun out there in the field with these little gas-powered gadgets, And then his brother, Norman, he was an amazing student. I think he graduated valedictorian. If you asked him a question, like in school, what's the speed of sound? He had it. Speed of light. How far away from the moon? He had it. Everything. Norm Mosier was brilliant, and he was a good friend of mine. I'd ask him a question, and he'd give you the answer. And that, to me, back then was, it was nice to be able to go somebody and ask a question and get an answer. He was a walking encyclopedia, So he was a good friend. And then there was a girl we nicknamed Butch. And she played baseball as good as the boys. She was amazing, and she was a good friend. Still alive today. I remember she collided with me at the one-room school. One of the recess things during the wintertime was you brought your hand sled, and boy, you could have a wonderful time on your noon hour sliding downhill. And you'll see up there by the school that there was a stretch of this County Route 24. They straightened the road, so they left us a stretch of road right near the school. So we could go up there, and on an icy day, boy, we could sail down through there like nobody's business. And then on going back home on an icy day, I could go at the top of the hill the other way, and I could run and flop down on my hand sled, and I could go all the way down the hill and into my driveway. So that was quite an interesting time. But to get back to Butch was going down the hill, headed the same direction, and she lost control of her sled, and she ran right into my head. And I went out. I don't remember anything except a whole group of kids around me. But I guess the end of the sled hit me right in the temple. At the one-room school, being a rock quarry, there were these big boulders with dynamite holes in them. And my brother decided that we would go up to the school, and he filled that hole with gunpowder. He made his own black powder. I remember it was sulfur and carbon and saltpeter and something else he put in this. It was pretty potent stuff. And so he made a fuse by putting the gunpowder in the fuse and then wrapping it in paper. So we got up above the where the hole was in the huge boulder, and his idea was to throw rocks at the fuse, and that would light the fuse and go down and blow the boulder apart. That was his dream, to blow the boulder apart. So anyway, he had me run around and gather stones, and then we stood up on the hill above it, and we threw rocks at the fuse, and nothing happened. And he said to me, he says, "Jace," he said, I don't know what I did wrong. So he grabbed a rock, and he went down there and just tapped the end of that fuse, and it went right down and blew. And it was quite an explosion.
And him? Did he get away in time?
Well, he lost his hearing, and he was temporary, but he couldn't see. He was in shock. So I grabbed him by the arm, and there was blood running down his forehead, I remember. And I took him down to my mother, and I said, "Mother, Dickie has been hurt, And she looked at him, and she says, "Why, that's nothing." And so she pulled the rocks out of his forehead, and so by then he was starting to come to, from what happened. And Mother never asked him about how it happened or anything, But and
your mother's a hero.
So anyway, I got him home, and so I that was another experience at the one-room school.